That is what happened a couple of winters ago. I had already settled my breakup some 6 months before all this, and I was frankly tired mentally. All that was happening in my life seemed heavy, as though I was stuck perpetually with a massive load that I couldn't put down. My then-girlfriend Mia instructed me to take her on a short vacation, something far from the mayhem that I had been living in. We discovered a cabin for rent close to Emerald Lake in northern Colorado. The listing seemed promising. It was a new but cozy house, peacefully sitting next to the icy lake, amidst pine trees. There were a couple of other cabins around, but most of them seemed vacant. That suited me just fine. I wanted solitude. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be far away from everything. The owner wasn't going to greet us when we arrived, but he left directions, where to find the key, general information regarding the location, all the typical things you'd find in a rental. We came in mid-morning. It was chilly and beautiful, with grayish snow falling softly everywhere. There was a small package on the front porch. No name, no return address. Only a scribble on it. Enjoy your stay. Stay warm. That part was rather sweet. Inside the package, there was only one thing. A box of matches. Little. We assumed it was some weird welcome gift. Unusual maybe, but nothing to worry about. Mia laughed and told us mountain folks were always a little quirky. We didn't think much of it. The next few days were peaceful. We spent hours walking slowly through the snowy woods, drinking hot cider by the fire, and doing absolutely nothing that was important, which was just what I required. Snow fell continuously during our stay. Not a full-blown blizzard, but regularly enough to keep everything intact, as though we had the world to ourselves. The cabin was nicely designed. My bedroom was located upstairs with huge windows facing the lake. We would be in bed at night and see snowflakes falling through the skylight. You could even hear it, a soft, steady sound that assisted you in sleeping well. During the third night, around midnight, I woke up. I first thought it was the wind that had awakened me, but immediately knew that the snow had fallen even more intensely. It was falling thickly, turning the quiet forest into a view that seemed to be almost the same as a snow globe. It was then that I heard it, a strange noise, almost mechanical, something that didn't belong in the middle of nowhere. I sat up, trying to focus. I didn't want to wake Mia, so I snuck out of bed and went over to the window. And that's when I saw it. A snowmobile. Just one, moving slowly across the frozen lake. Now, I understand that people ride snowmobiles across frozen lakes all the time, particularly up here. But it was nearly 1 a.m., the snow was getting deeper, and this guy was traveling as if he weren't completely certain that the ice would support him. And then abruptly, the machine cut off. The guy stepped off and began flailing his arms. They seemed like they were yelling, clearly attempting to call someone's attention. There wasn't much to see in the snow, but one thing was certain. They were standing toward our cabin. It was creepy. I first thought maybe they were hurt or in some sort of distress. Maybe they were lost. So I woke up Mia and told her what I had seen. I quickly dressed, put on layers, and went out onto the deck. Straight away I could feel the cold pierce through each layer like it didn't even exist. That is when I heard her scream. The woman on the ice was screaming for help. She was yelling that she was in need of help, that her little boy had walked away and gotten lost in the blizzard. She was shaking with voice, maybe with cold, maybe with fear. She sounded frantic. I did not stop to think. If there was a child out there in that sort of weather, alone, they would not live. I told Mia to stay home and call for someone if I did not make it back quickly. As I moved closer, I could see her better. She was covered with a thick fur coat, and her hair was tucked back. She appeared to have been out there a while. The ice was solid, no cracks, no sign of danger. That reassured me a little. At least the kid hadn't crashed through. She only maintained that her son had run away, and she'd been looking for him. That halted me. That didn't compute. In my head, I was thinking she was going to say something like he'd fallen off the snowmobile, or she glanced away for a moment. Running away? In a snowstorm? That didn't compute. I was about to push her for more, to get some kind of sincere explanation, when she turned to me and smiled. And then she asked me if I still had those matches. For a moment, I didn't realize what she meant. Then it hit me, the package, the note. She had left it, not the host. Before I could react, she pulled a gun out of her coat. She demanded my phone and wallet. I relinquished them to her. I had no choice. She did not say another word. She remounted her snowmobile and fled into the thick snowfall. I turned and dashed back to the cabin, shouting for Mia to call the police. She was already on the phone when I got home. We locked the door, closed the curtains, and waited. I paced back and forth constantly. I kept glancing out the window waiting for the woman to come back. The police arrived an hour later. The snow had covered up everything of the woman or the snowmobile by then. I was shaken, crying uncontrollably, but I just felt mad. Mad that this peaceful retreat was reduced to something like this. The police canvassed around and eventually found an old boat ramp on the other side of the lake. They estimated she must have been from there. I urged them to keep searching, but they explained something I had already learned. The snow made it virtually impossible to track anything. We tried to track my phone, but it was already dead. The only good part? The cabin's owner gave us a full refund. He sounded surprised and genuinely concerned. He swore he hadn't left any welcome package, but something didn't feel right. How could that woman have known we'd be there? It was too personal, too planned. A part of me still thinks the owner did it, but I've got nothing. I told Airbnb, but that didn't do anything for me. The worst part? I couldn't help but wonder if my ex-wife had something to do with it. She'd known I needed to take a vacation. She'd known I'd probably go off the radar. I could imagine her laughing at it, thinking it this huge joke. I understand that does sound absurd, but the entire ordeal still doesn't make sense. Why go through all that trouble just to steal a wallet and phone? Unless she wasn't stealing things, unless she enjoyed getting a perverted thrill out of scaring the living daylight out of someone. Even now, I still wonder about it. Not often, but when the snow starts falling and everything is silent, sometimes I think of the smile on that woman's face. And of the matches. A few summers ago, my family had this beach house near a small coastal town in Oregon. It wasn't anything impressive, but it was in our family for years and held a lot of memories. The house was 2 stories high and had a tiny attic that my little brother Eli and I would play with as our own little world when we were kids. We'd bring our sleeping bags up there, pretend to camp, and occasionally sneak up our beagle puppy, Milo, too. There was a little window in the attic overlooking the shoreline, and we'd sit and watch the waves and beachcombers on the beach through it like some hidden observation post. We loved that. Finally, though, we became too big for our little hideout. Both of us felt awkward fitting in there. We phased out the sleepovers in the attic, and it felt like the end of something very special, although we didn't say anything. I think that was one of those little signs that we were growing up. When our grandparents passed away, our parents took over all of their furniture. The attic was basically a storage room for all the small items that they didn't want to part with but didn't have room for in the house. Old clocks, frames for pictures, antique lamps, those kinds of things. I remember helping with boxes going up there. It was depressing but kind of comforting, like we were holding on to pieces of them. It got harder and harder to go out to the beach house as the years passed. School and jobs interfered. We were lucky to have one entire week together as a family, usually in late July. My parents did not even want to rent it out in the off-seasons either. They were too scared some stranger would break or steal something from the attic. But then, soon enough, money started getting tight. College tuition did not pay itself, and my parents determined that they had to do something. This is when they met Richard, a former Navy mechanic who had moved to the region. He was a late 60-ish man with a stoop to his shoulders, shaggy white hair, and a deep scar running down his cheek that forced you to look a second too long. His voice also had this odd, raspy quality that sent shivers down one's spine. My father told me that the man had deserved a peaceful place to reside after all he'd been through during the service. He trusted him. I never liked the man. Neither did Eli. But we didn't have a say. My dad offered him a reduced lease on the cottage for a year for cheap. It meant that we wouldn't be going that summer. But my parents were broke and Richard needed a place to stay. My mom wasn't thrilled about it either, but she supported the decision, initially. The plan was to have Richard stay there, but my parents called in from time to time. Not personally. They had landscapers keep an eye on him each time they were in the neighborhood. The idea was to check that he hadn't hurt himself or ruined the property. It sounded like a good plan, courteous, discreet. But things went awry some months later. The landscapers called my mom and told her that Richard had been strange. They caught him sitting out for hours, staring at kids playing on the beach. He was doing other stuff sometimes that they wouldn't even discuss. When my mom had heard this, she flipped. She told my dad that it was completely irresponsible to have someone like that live in a family house. It was a major battle. My dad still thought of him as a war hero, but when the lease ran out, he gave up. He told Richard some repairs were in the works and the utilities would be shut off for a few months. That convinced him to leave. He did not complain, just gathered his belongings and cleared out. My mother had the landscapers help him just to get a head start. I think we all felt sort of relieved, even my father, though he did not admit it. The next year, when Eli graduated from college, we all finally made plans to return. It was the first time in forever that we were all going back together. My parents had just adopted a black lab mix named Jasper, and Eli hadn't met him yet, so he was especially anticipating it. It was getting dark when we got to the house. We hadn't filled the fridge, so we went out into town for supper. Jasper had been odd just before we left, tense, ears up, pacing around the stairs, but we attributed it to him getting used to the new place. Supper didn't take long, maybe an hour, two, but when we came back, the moment we stepped inside, something was off. It was the kind of sensation where you go into a place that you know, but everything is different. And then we encountered Jasper. He was lying at the bottom of the stairs, gasping for breath, a streak of blood in front of him. My sister let out a shriek. My mom picked up her phone, likely to call someone for assistance. My dad, in silence, went to the kitchen and returned with a knife. I took a flashlight and trailed behind him as we explored the house. We froze upstairs. The attic hatch, the very same one my brother Eli and I crawled through as kids, hung open a bare inch, just enough for us to see the faint beam of a flashlight coming from inside. I was frozen with terror. Every part of me yearned to run, but I couldn't get my feet to move. My dad didn't hesitate. He got out the ladder and went up in seconds. I stayed on the ground floor. I couldn't make myself go after him. I waited. No screaming, no fight, total silence. Finally, after what felt like forever, my dad came downstairs and was surprisingly more surprised than angry. He told me that it was Richard in a whisper. For some unknown reason, he had been able to let himself back in and was holding out upstairs. My mom went running upstairs, and when she heard, she was as angry as one could be. She was furious, especially when she discovered he still had one of our house keys, despite my dad telling her the locks had been changed. The police arrived a bit later and pulled Richard down from the attic. He was terrible, ill, and frail. The cops found the key on him, making things worse. My mom was screaming. My sister was crying. I just stood there, as if the house that I had come to love had turned into something that I did not recognize anymore. The worst of it was that Jasper lived, but just barely. He had been stabbed. We had no idea when or how, but he pulled through on an emergency trip to the vet. Even with all that, my dad refused to press charges. My mom and Eli were furious. It became one of the worst arguments I've ever seen between my parents. My dad said he didn't want to destroy the life of an old man who had already lost everything, but none of us could understand how he could forgive someone who hurt our dog and broke into our home. That was a year ago. We have not been back to the beach house since. I don't even care to. The house is no longer the same. It's no longer the attic adventures or the serene beach mornings. It's now only an empty shell, complete with memories that I'm not sure that I can believe anymore. Last summer, I was 21 and went through an experience that still lingers on. My name is Alex, and my friend Daniel's family is very wealthy. His dad is a leading corporate lawyer who defends international clients. They have some properties all over the world, one of which is a beautiful villa located on a secluded lake in southern France. The lake is not enormous, but large enough that it would be an enormous task to swim from one side to the other. The villa is one of several large houses along the lake, most of them vacation properties and usually uninhabited. Daniel's parents didn't come around much, so he more or less had the villa to himself. He'd invite friends over all the time, and if his parents said it was okay, we'd have the villa to ourselves. There's something about being by the lake that makes you feel like anything can happen. It's not the same as the beach, private and serene. I'd fantasize about having a place like that someday. Daniel and I were sitting on the pier one evening, drinking a couple of beers. I had recently broken up with my then girlfriend of 3 years and was in the mood to unwind. Sitting there, I noticed a flash of light on the lake. I initially thought it was the sun reflecting off of something, but even when I moved my head, the light continued to flash. It wasn't random. It was a sequence. 3 brief flashes, 3 longer, then 3 brief. Daniel recognized it as Morse code for sauce. I was skeptical, but a quick internet search on my phone confirmed he was right. Chendurs.com. The flashing continued for about a minute before it ceased. We were both confused and concerned. It could have been a joke, but maybe someone was in a jam. Daniel had said he would call the police, but we had been drinking and neither of us were legal yet. I had already got a DUI charge, so I didn't feel like involving the police. We figured to go check it out and call the police if necessary. We went inside and grabbed a couple of switchblades from Daniel's brother's collection. He was a knife enthusiast and had a few. Daniel offered to drive, but I didn't feel like that, so we opted to use his father's kayak instead. We pulled it into the lake and paddled out onto the lake. At first, we were laughing and enjoying ourselves, but when we approached the other side, the mood changed. The sun was nearing sundown, and the darkness hung in an ominous atmosphere. When we paddled towards the house that we had noticed light in, we realized that it was an old and dilapidated house. The dock had partially collapsed, making it unsuitable for use, so we beached the kayak on the lawn instead. The yard wasn't that high above the water, so it was a simple climb. We looked up at the house. The light came from the second floor. Daniel was in a panic and wanted us to go away and call the police, but I mentioned that we didn't have cell on the lake and had to access Wi-Fi to place a call. We had already explored abandoned houses, so I convinced him to continue. We didn't go in the front door. We found an open window at the side and climbed in through that. The house was vacant, a total vacuum of furniture, personal items, anything. It did not even look like anyone had ever occupied the place. We moved stealthily through the rooms, searching for stairs. At last, we found them and made our way to the second floor. I had recollection of where the window with light was, so we headed that way. We found ourselves at a door that was shut, and I listened against it but didn't hear anything. Daniel gestured, and I carefully opened the door. The room was empty apart from an old projector and located towards the window. Red flags went off in my head. This was a setup. Somebody had taken extra effort to arrange this to catch somebody off guard. Daniel also had the same idea because he took an abrupt dash back in the same way we had come. I turned and ran in pursuit of him without hesitation. I could hear the door open from behind us as we took off down the stairs, then the sound of rapid footsteps. We sprinted through the house and out the window we had entered. Daniel was already at the shore of the lake when I caught up to him. He cursed, and I quickly saw why. The kayak was gone. At the back of the house, a man was sprinting in our direction. I didn't catch a very good look, but he was big and fast. I pulled out my switchblade, ready to defend myself. but Daniel plunged into the lake, fully dressed. I followed on impulse. The lake was frigid, but adrenaline kept us going. We swam for the lights of Daniel's house, which seemed miles off. The swim seemed like an eternity, yet we made it. By the time we landed on the dock, I was shuddering horribly. We ran in, barricaded all the doors, and phoned the police. It took them nearly an hour to arrive. When they did, they walked across the lake to investigate, but could discover nothing. The house had stood vacant for years, and there was no sign that anyone had occupied it recently. They were not pleased with us and reprimanded us for having called them in the first place. Daniel's parents were furious when they found out and threatened to sue the town and police. I never got invited to the lake house again after that. I still have no idea who was at this house or what they intended to do. My friends all believe that it was a setup and that whoever arranged it got cold feet at the last minute. I do not like to think about what would have occurred had they gone ahead with their plan.